Sorted.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Education on Air in our session, Innovating Pedagogy for Impactful Learning. We've got an awesome session ready for you today with a really diverse set of panelists to dig into this topic a little bit more. My name is Tim Anderson. I am a former 7th and 8th grade teacher, and now I'm part of the Google for Education team. And this is part of our Future of the Classroom program. So earlier this year, we worked with a global team of researchers and analysts to dig into 8 emerging trends in K-12 education, one of which is what we'll be focusing on today, Innovating Pedagogy. So to check out the full global report, head over to g.co/future of the classroom. And there you'll be able to find both our global and country reports. We also have interviews with experts, curated training resources, videos, and more. So lots of good stuff there. But let's take a look at what we've got going on today. So for the next hour, we'll be really focused on this topic of innovating pedagogy, and we'll kick things off with an overview of the research. So one of the folks from our research team is here to give a quick rundown of the findings there. And then we will hear from each of the 4 panelists who are joining us today. So they'll share a little bit about their background, their organization, and their experience with this really important topic. From there, we'll head into a panel discussion. So we have a few questions ready, but as we're going through today, if there are things that you're curious about or questions that you have, definitely add in those questions, and we'll make some time for them as well. So to kick things off, do just some quick intros before everyone introduces themselves in a few minutes. But as you'll see, we've got Chris Creinches, who is joining us from London and is our head of Insight at Campus 8. We've also got Amy Mayer, Alexander Angelov, Ben Rouse, and Angela Hardy, who each have really interesting perspectives on this topic. So excited to hear from all of them today. But we'll go ahead and kick it over to Chris to walk us through the research. Chris, over to you.
Cheers, thanks, Tim. So as mentioned, I'm Chris. I'm Head of Insight at Campus 8. By way of a quick introduction, Campus 8 is a behavioural insights and cultural trends agency. So we've got offices in London, where I am, New York and LA. And our work is designed to provide a better understanding of human behaviour and trends in society. The short presentation I'm going to take you through today is the result of a research project commissioned by the Google Education team to explore the major trends and conversations emerging within K-12 education globally. From this research, we identified 8 key trends in total across 13 different markets, all of which you can read more about in the full Future of Classroom report, which Tim just referred to. But today I'll be taking through one of those trends identified, which is innovating pedagogy. Before I do, I'm just going to give a quick overview of, on the next slide, on the methodology behind this research before we kind of jump into the context. So the Campus 8 team is made up of analysts from a range of backgrounds. We've got anthropologists, semioticians, academics, journalists, and we use a range of bespoke research methodologies across our projects. For this project in particular, we ran 14 expert interviews with global and country thought leaders in education. So we spoke with Dr. Hannah Dumont, who's an educational psychologist and researcher, who's particularly helpful in shaping our thinking on innovating pedagogy and teacher support. We conducted a robust academic literature review, and the global report includes over 90 sources, alongside desk research and a tool called Quid, which runs off the LexisNexis database of 1 billion online articles. So that enabled us to conduct a media narrative analysis of key conversations bubbling up. So as mentioned, this led us to identify 8 key themes, which are explored in the global report, and today I'm going to be talking through innovating pedagogy. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about innovating pedagogy? So if you just go to the slide before, just on the, that's it, yeah. So what we're actually talking about, we're talking about innovating pedagogy. Well, at its heart, this trend looks at how teachers can free up time to focus on their teaching practice and personal development and innovate in those areas. So what we found is that across the globe, if we look at an average teacher's working day of 8 hours, 3 of those hours will be spent on tasks like marking, lesson planning, admin, while 5 will be spent on actual teaching. And there's a growing desire from both teachers and schools, mirrored by efforts in innovation, to help teachers make a smarter use of those 3 non-teaching hours. So this isn't necessarily with an end goal of changing that 3 to 5 hour split. It's just as much about making smarter use of those 3 hours so that a greater proportion of that non-teaching time can be spent lesson planning or for personal development. Because not only is this beneficial for students, it's also been found to have a real impact on teacher engagement and motivation personally. So if you go on to the next slide, so what's actually happening and what does this look like in practice? Well, it's no real surprise that technology is at the forefront of helping teachers to make better use of their time, both improving and freeing up space for personal development. Previous research has found that in the UK, for example, 84% of teachers say that technology saves educators time, and that can be helping with things like grading papers and homework or common administrative tasks. It's also been found to be driving forward efforts in collaboration. So in Mexico, we're seeing technology used to increase communication and cooperation between educators, which in turn is then saving them time and improving their practice. Previous research there found that 60% of teachers say technology allows for collaborative work between teachers, and 83% said that one of the main advantages of technology is that it allows them to search for, edit, and create lesson content with greater ease across teams. And it's working, to the extent that in that same UK survey that I referenced before, found that 88% of teachers feel that educational technology enables pedagogical innovation and improves the quality of education. So I've mentioned this is a global trend. If we move on to the next slide, we'll see how it's playing out across the world. So in Sweden, if we start on the top right there, the time crunch is very real, with 86% of teachers reporting that they have too much work on, citing things like filling out forms as being one of the most time-consuming tasks. In Italy, teachers say they spend around 20% of their time on administrative tasks, maintaining order in the classroom. That's 8 and 13% respectively. In Spain, similar to what I was mentioning in Mexico, 52% of teachers say technology allows for collaboration between teachers. And really interestingly, actually, in the US, only 10% of K-12 teachers feel secure in their ability to incorporate higher level technology into their classrooms, which is quite surprising. So there's definitely room for support with this to help them become more familiar and confident in using higher level technology in the classroom, particularly because there's a real appetite for that support. So 79% of teachers in the States say they want to go through training to become more familiar with such tools to help them improve and innovate within their practice. If we go on to look at further reading, as mentioned, the full report looks at this in greater detail, with more examples and context. And the report also links to a number of sources and studies for further reading. So for example, I mentioned at the top our interview with Dr. Hannah Dumont, who actually published a paper looking at the discrepancy between reported increases in innovation in the classroom against the perception that schools are seen as somehow resistant to change. So it pulls apart what's going on within that tension, as well as looking in greater depth at how innovative pedagogies may be developed and applied and actually scale that throughout practice. So definitely recommended for some further reading. I think that's a good note to end on. I kind of want to pass over to our fascinating group of panelists we've got together today. So thanks for listening. Do check out the full Future of Classroom report to read more on this and the other 8 trends we identified. And now I'll pass over to Amy.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. It's a really interesting discussion. I own a Google partner company, and we provide the teacher professional development that you just heard teachers in the United States say they want so much. I'm really passionate about it because I also am a former teacher. I was a high school English teacher, and so I'm very passionate about helping teachers find ways that they can streamline those duties that they have when they're not working with students. That's the most important work we do. Everything else, we need to learn how to do that better in a more streamlined way so that we can focus our energies and time on working with students and doing the things that we know matter for learning. So thanks for having me today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander. I live and work in Bulgaria, and I can say that I visited more than 1,000 schools all over the world, spent a month in the United States, a month in Chile, and also a month in Scandinavia. And for the last 10 years, I'm really curious how technology and education go together. On the way to finish my PhD, and I'm also running Google for Education partner company here in Bulgaria. Unlike in the US and many other countries, there is just one Google for Education partner here in the whole country, and that's our organization. So you might think that this makes things easy. I would say it's the other way around, and I'll be very happy to talk to you later on. Thank you.
Hi there, everyone. So I'm Ben. I was a maths teacher for 13 years in the UK, and now I'm the UK Director for Apps Events. Funnily, that seems to mean I spend very little time in the UK and travel around quite a lot for this. So from being a maths teacher, I did a master's in leading innovation and change around the time that we started to adopt technology in my own school. And that's kind of led to doing a lot more training. And I've had some really interesting opportunities around the world to go and do some training. And it gives some interesting insights to the education systems around the world. So really looking forward to sharing today. And I'll pass on to Angela.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here to talk about this topic today. I'm currently a research analyst at Digital Promise. Digital Promise is a nonprofit that works at the intersection of educational leadership, technology developers, and researchers to improve learning opportunities for everyone and to close the digital learning gap. And as Chris was speaking, I was like, you're telling my story as a former educator. When I taught for nearly a decade in the south of France and then in Texas, I was one of those true believers in the power of technology to innovate pedagogy. But I also had a lot of insecurities and fears about how to actually implement the tools that I wanted to try and the strategies associated with them without any training or guidance. So now I'm working as part of a team of researchers, and we're studying a classroom coaching program called the Dynamic Learning Project, which is funded by Google and implemented by our partners at EdTech team. And the idea is by embedding a coach within each participating school and providing training to that coach and an administrator that they're working with, we can empower that coach to then train teachers to leverage technology to its full advantage in innovating pedagogy. So excited to talk more about that as we get into the discussion.
Awesome. Well, thanks to all of our panelists, and thanks, Chris, for the overview of the research. Just a quick plug, with the panel discussion, like I mentioned earlier, we'll have a few questions to start, but as we're hearing from our panelists, if there are things that you're curious to learn more about or want to kind of dig deeper into, feel free to throw those questions into the chat, and we'll answer those as well. So as we can see, this is something that's really top of mind around the globe and something that is so important for effective instruction and to really drive student achievement. So let's kick things off. So first question, what are the biggest changes you've seen in professional development and teacher training over the last decade? How is it evolving? What are the things that stand out most as you're looking back 10 years ago? And Ben, we'll start with you if that works.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go back a decade in my own career, I was kind of early into my teaching, and a lot of the professional development I remember getting in the UK where I was teaching was very much sit and get. There might be the inspirational speaker that was brought in to speak to all the staff for an hour or so, or maybe more. but I think my reflections on that were always, where's the impact? Like, what am I going to go and do with this? Because then, your next teaching class would walk in, and it's very easy to forget all of that. So some of the changes. So, I mean, at Apps Events, and I'm sure Amy and Alexander would feel very much the same, and also EdTech team when they're doing their training, is hands-on is the way that we've taken, particularly the technology training. So get the tools in the hands of the teachers so they can see it and think about how they might implement it. So that's the kind of route. I did some training sessions with school, and that led to more and more. So I think getting hands-on when it comes to technology, and then also we do day trainings at schools, and the feedback's great and everyone's happy about it, but it always feels like there's a tail off afterwards as people get back into their day job and find it hard to implement. So things like the Dynamic Learning Project, where you've got coaches in school working with teachers day to day. So where we've done train the trainer programs with schools, those are the ones that we've seen more often implement technology effectively, where it's pedagogy focused and has an impact that, and you can see the development of teachers using it, whether that's to save time or whether that's to innovate the way that they kind of present learning to students. I think those are the impactful ways I've seen it used. And the impression I get, though, when some people come to our events, they seem to, the sit and get still seems to be a thing. So, but it's nice to see that the coaching model is getting more and more leverage around the education systems. So that's my own reflections, but most of my time has been spent in the UK, so I'd be really interested to hear if anyone's got some alternatives or whether that's similar to them.
Ben, I'd say my experience is very similar. As a matter of fact, I wrote down an answer to this question just in case somebody asked me, later. And I said very similar things to you. In fact, I'm really surprised how similar our answers are. One thing I'd add to what you said is that we do a lot more now of when we're working with teachers. We do a lot more modeling ourselves of what we want them to do when they go back to the classroom. What teachers have been telling us is that this is all good. We know why you want us to do this now, but exactly how do we put that into practice tomorrow is the question we're still left with. And so that's the focus of most of what we do now. We don't want teachers to say, but yeah, I don't know how this looks in the classroom tomorrow. We want to be able to say, we showed you today. You acted as a student today. You did the work that you want your students to do tomorrow. And we modeled for you what your work as a teacher will look like in that environment. So I think exactly what you explained and what you guys are doing.
Yeah, and Amy and I were lucky enough to spend a bit of time together in New York, and I think some of the training sessions that have gone down well have been those ones where it's very much live it as a student and see how you can take that back and implement it. So yeah, really agree.
Yeah, to jump in, I think that it's awesome that we're all kind of on the same page. I wrote very similar things down about moving away from passive learning activities to more job-embedded models, such as classroom coaching, where there's these opportunities for active learning. In the US, over a 15-year period, the number of instructional coaches has doubled. And at least 90% of students attend a school where there's at least one instructional coach. And beyond the active learning opportunities, another element of coaching that we've seen really has changed the way that professional development is delivered is the ability of coaches to make the learning coherent with what the teacher is already doing. So they can transfer it directly into their practice because it's aligned with the lesson plan they're teaching tomorrow. And it's aligned with their district goals and with their school goals. And it's aligned with the resources that they already have. And because they have that personalization from the coach, they're able to directly get exactly the tips and the feedback and the reflection tools that they need to grow in their specific practice from their starting point.
And if you don't mind, to add a layer of how technology and culture to this question. Just 10 years ago, in Europe, the biggest funding of let's say, for teachers and students to travel and visit other European countries started, and that's funded by the European Commission. And it's a huge thing because in Europe, if for in 1 hour flight, you can visit 5 different cultures because countries are smaller than on other continents, and cultures are very, very different. So just 10 years ago, teachers really started to travel and visit different schools, meet different coaches. And from technology perspective, I would say that internet was already a big thing in 2009, but it's almost everything now. And by saying that, if there was a doubt if professional development and teacher training should include technology and in what way, maybe the focus was on how teachers and pedagogical staff is adapt in using technology in general. And right now it's linking to you guys more and more focused on what's the actual product that technology in the classroom setup will bring. Thank you.
Yeah, all really good thoughts, and definitely interesting to hear how there's so many similarities from country to country with this. And if we switch gears and look to the future, so it seems like it's a space where there's been a lot of change and a lot of it sounds like improvement in the way that educators are able to make really good use of professional development opportunities and really pull these learnings back into their instructional practice. If we're looking 10 years down the road, we'll round up and say 2030. What do you expect could change, and what things seem to be on the horizon for professional development and teacher training? Amy, we'll start with you.
Well, I'm glad that you picked me to talk about this because we said so many positive things about what's going on in education and with professional development right now, but we didn't talk about a thing that, at least where I live, is a major concern and probably the biggest issue that we face, and that is standardized testing and what has happened to educators in their daily lives as a result of standardized, high-stakes standardized testing, one-shot testing. And where I live, and I guess all of us who are living and working in the United States, this has changed the whole landscape for professional development because so much focus has to be placed on things that are going to impact those tests and end up impacting school funding. So what I hope to see in the next 10 years is I hope that we'll start to realize that education is an individual journey. It's individual for the teacher, it's individual for the child, the student, and that no amount of measuring that education and looking at it as a whole is going to tell us the story of that individual student or teacher. So I hope that in 10 years we'll be achieving the things that we want to today, but we'll be focusing much more of our time on this wonderful aspect of professional development that we've all been discussing, and much less on the standardization of education that's caused major problems, at least from my perspective. And I'm really curious to hear what my colleagues from other areas think about that, and whether that's had an impact on you and what you do.
I mean, I can talk about the UK that we often sort of, when we're doing training sessions and professional development engagements, that the test at the end of a student's period of time at school does come into this, where we've had, well, they've got to write on paper, so shouldn't everything be on paper kind of comments, which is maybe more extreme. I don't think everyone thinks like that. But it definitely sits on the horizon of a student's education and does kind of hold teachers back. Actually, Tim, I think you've had Rob Houben from Agora on a previous episode, and I think that's probably an interesting school where they're doing things very differently, and they have very much not focused on standardized tests. So if anyone hasn't heard about Agora, I think that's probably an interesting example of where we might be able to go, and can professional development support that? Because I know Rob said that one of the big challenges to growing Agora, which is no grade levels, no testing particularly, it's all project based, that one of his biggest challenges was training teachers for facilitating that kind of learning. So it'd be interesting to see how we might develop towards that.
Totally. Quick note there, for folks who are interested, I think Ben gave a really good kind of overview of the ethos of Agora. But we had Rob, who's head of school there, joined for an earlier Education on Air session focused on student-led learning. And that's available on demand to watch on our website. So g.co/future of the classroom if you're interested in hearing from folks on that topic, including Rob from Agora. So just a quick note for everyone. Yeah, let's we'll jump back in. Any thoughts from the rest of the panelists on 2030? Where are we headed? What might we expect?
To connect with what Amy mentioned about the emphasis on preparing teachers who teach subjects and grade levels that are involved in standardized testing, I think we've seen with instructional coaching that generally math coaches, reading coaches are more prevalent in schools than coaches who are going to be working with band teachers or art teachers or any teachers of foreign language and non-tested subjects. So one hope that I have is that as we move forward with Teacher PD, that we expand what we offer and we expand the offer of quality teacher professional development, such as classroom coaching, to teachers of all subject areas to help them integrate the best technology tools that can help them with the pedagogical strategies that are appropriate for their specific content area, whether that is tied to a standardized test or not.
I can say that as far as I know, around half of the countries around the world do require a university degree in pedagogy for a person to become a teacher. That's the case in the country I live as well, but also many other countries. And looking at the number of the demography around the world, it seems like there is a very big number of people who will be a teacher and they're not teachers now. In that aspect, it's of greatest importance to work with higher education institutions right now, and we as Google for Education partners and also many other experts, I believe, should focus on higher education. Because the way you prepare future teachers is how eventually, everything will look in 2030. Standardized testing is a big pain here as well, because there are so many people and families that don't believe that certain amount of information delivered in a specific moment is worth, dictating what you're going to do for the next 5 years or in your lifetime. So I would really like to see that higher education is more open to change, as at least that much as the schools are, because I've seen universities being a bit more stubborn in changing or embracing the reality and innovation compared to schools, which is a bit sad. And on the other hand, we don't know many of the professions that we will work in the next 10, 20 years. So I would say that PD should be more and more open-ended, not focused on specific subject.
If I can just jump in as well, I think from our point of view, I'd almost like to be out of a job in terms of specifically focusing on technology for Teacher PD. It'd be nice to get to the point where it's just another tool for great learning, along with anything else that teachers might use, the physical space, outdoors, and obviously with the internet, it also means that learning influences can come from all over. But yeah, it'd be nice to kind of not be so focused on technology as a thing, and that just be laced in amongst good teaching.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know if you noticed, but I have some antique technology tools behind me here today, and they're typewriters, in case you can't see that, and they remind us that we don't really do a lot with typing class anymore, because it's a technology that we don't need to study independently. And so I love what you said, Ben. That's exactly where we want to be. We want to be talking about good teaching and how we get people to learn the best way they can as individuals instead of about technology.
Really good points. And switching gears a little bit. So one thing that is very true of the folks who use Google for Education tools in their classrooms is that they love to take action. So they love to put things into practice and really get things moving. So for someone who is looking to switch things up with their approach to professional development heading into the new year, what's one piece of advice that you would give them to make some of those changes? And we'll start with Alexander, if that sounds good.
Thank you. Talk more to your students and talk more to the society and the people who live close to the school or you have some kind of connection with, and try to plan teaching activities and teaching experience, time they spend in school or whatever they learn new things, more connected to real life. And be more patient, because we live in a very high-paced world, and usually it really needs a moment that you step back to understand better why people behave a certain way. So that would be my advice. And focus more on information rather than technology.
Do you guys see a problem where you work with school administrators who, in their mind, it's really clear what everybody should want to achieve? They have this vision for what schools should be like in the year 2019 or 2020. They know what that looks like to them, but the people who are working for and with them don't necessarily understand the vision that leader has. I find that problem all the time. I think I understand what the leader wants, but sometimes teachers don't even know what that vision is. So the advice that I would give is, if you're a leader in education, to really think about and really enunciate what your vision for education is, why you think those changes should be made. What would it look like? Literally, what would be going on if you walked into a classroom where these changes you think should be made have already occurred? And then share that with everyone and talk to them, talk to the people involved about how we're going to get there. What do students think about how we're going to get there? What do teachers think about how we're going to get there? And that's your professional development plan. How we get there, that is what professional development should be focusing on. And a lot of times that is literally how to use the technology nowadays, which we'd all love to get away from. We don't want to be talking about where we click, but we also can't forget that, because I don't know about you guys, I'm guessing you too see a lot of schools where people have this great desire to change. They don't exactly maybe know how, but they don't actually know what to do. They don't know what to do in the classroom tomorrow to start working toward that change. So creating a vision, sharing it with everyone, and then having that discussion, like Alexander said, with students and with teachers about what we need to get to that place. And then we start working toward that goal by chipping away at those needs we have to get to that place. That's what I would encourage people to do.
If I can jump in as well, I absolutely agree with that. And also, I would like to see it's like giving teachers that space to think about that vision and how they move towards it. And one of the things I've been fortunate enough to do over the last few years is travel around and work and do and visit a number of other places. Not quite to the length and extent that Alexander has, so I'm going to have to work on that. But the education systems that maybe you've heard through OECD reports as being successful, so Finland, Singapore are the ones that normally come to mind. The common theme I've found in discussions with teachers from those places is that they seem to get time to talk to each other and craft the learning experience for their students, whereas we might find my own experience in the UK was a lot of back-to-back lessons, and you don't necessarily get some time to sit down with your colleagues or with a coach and just reflect and decide like how you want to move forward. So in terms of advice, if there is the opportunity to provide that time for teachers to spend that time together discussing their professional development in the right way, I think that could be very valuable to seeing positive changes in the classroom.
And we've got a bunch of questions on the chat, so we'll go ahead and switch gears to that. And one thing to start off with, so there's a question from Anthony around social and emotional learning. So currently, how much training do you see given to social and emotional learning, navigating social and emotional topics before and throughout a teacher's career? And what are your thoughts on that? Does it feel like it's about right? Is that something that you see emerging at all? Any thoughts there on social emotional learning?
I was kind of hoping that someone else would say they're seeing this emerging, but I don't see. I actually saw more of a focus on this a few years ago, when in my area, at least, people were really talking a lot about project-based learning, which is a learning theory that I very much espouse and believe in. Unfortunately, things come and go, these trends in education, and that trend kind of came in really strong and then went. And during that time, we were talking a lot about soft skills, and I thought, this is great. I mean, this really needs to happen. Companies like Google that are telling us what they need for workers to be able to do. This is what they're saying. We need people who can work together, who can collaborate, who understand that working with other people is a special skill set of its own. And unfortunately, I'm not hearing those conversations as much as I was even a few years ago, which is kind of sad.
I think, like Amy, I don't see it a lot, but I feel it's vastly important. So actually, I can talk briefly from my own children's experience that my children's school is very good at nurturing the social empathetic approach, but they have fallen in the way schools are judged because their outcomes haven't been consistently as good as they should be. But what we do get home is two boys that are learning about other people and how to treat people and how to develop that side of things. But it's not necessarily something that the school is judged on. So I think it's, in my experience, it's hard for schools to incorporate that all the time when they've got so many other things, standardized tests and others that they maybe are required to focus on. So
one way that we've seen it incorporated in our dynamic learning project schools is we developed kind of co-designing with our practitioners a framework for looking at what does impactful technology use look like. And that framework is designed around 21st century skills that we all know we've been talking about since the 90s, communication, collaboration, critical thinking. And when we have teachers working with their coaches to move forward and to progress in the depth that they're tackling, developing students, for example, collaboration skills, the coach is working with the teachers in a way that they're thinking about, what do these students need emotionally, what skills do they need to build socially to be able to exhibit that 21st century skill. And we've seen success with teachers kind of tracking their progress using that framework and thinking about it as something that they can measure their own growth and their ability to implement. So kind of formalizing it and having that framework has been useful to bring it back into the conversation and put it top of mind.
I would say that there are certain areas of knowledge or reports or adults, parents would raise different topics that should be taught in school, and because it's important to the society we live in, especially for young people. But we can't invent new subjects for each and every topic. Recently went through a study analyzing all European countries, and those are, that's beyond the European Union, those are 33, 35 countries. And on digital literacy, only 3 countries have separate subjects to develop digital literacy for their students. And so I think of social and emotional learning, we can have extra subject for that, and we shouldn't. Digital literacy and social and emotional learning and other key competencies should be embedded in what we do and every minute we spend as adults with young people. And that's not an easy thing, because generations change very rapidly right now. And in Bulgaria, we dramatically changed, at least for us and also other countries, the generation that was very active 30 years ago is very, very, very different from the generation living now. And if you speak to one part of the people about social emotional learning, they will get one thing and the others will get something else. And if you want to really teach something, you should get people on the same page. So a bit vague, but that's what I want to say on this.
Totally. So switching gears, so one thing that anyone who has worked in a school or parent can attest to is how important school culture is. So as we're thinking about professional development and its connection to school culture, what are those things that you see as most important for developing a culture where folks are willing to take risks and eventually work towards success with implementing new technology and tools into instruction?
I can start with this one. In our coaching program, we've seen that when teachers feel comfortable that they're not going to be evaluated on trying something new, when they're not going to be judged while they're in the middle of implementing something that they don't really know how it's going to go, they're much more willing to try new implementation of technology. And it's usually part of the administrator's role to set that cultural tone and to model that for their teachers. So if the administrator is getting up in front of the staff at a meeting and trying a new tool and modeling how that could be useful in the classroom and kind of being graceful if they make a mistake and failing forward, then teachers are gonna take that hint and be much more willing to try something new. And then in addition to that non-evaluative nature, also cultivating that culture of collaboration across different subject levels, across different grade levels, for teachers to share with each other their success stories, bright spots, what's worked, can help build that positive culture that's necessary for teachers to feel comfortable trying new things.
I think that seems very similar to the psychological safety, which was an aspect of when Google looked at its own successful teams. The successful teams were not the ones that were most technical or various other things. They're the ones that are psychologically safe. So it sounds like a similar theme there, that developing that as a culture amongst the teaching workforce, and I think developing that amongst every workforce seems a great way to go. I think there was a talk from Astro Teller. It was about developing that kind of aspect. So Astro leads the Moonshot Factory X, which is under Alphabet, and they're very much their culture is all about failing. So they try to prove something can't work by trying out everything rather than getting wedded to their own ideas, and therefore they are able to try things that might seem on the face of it difficult or impossible. So I think that rings true, but very difficult to develop that culture. And I know from if maybe some UK teachers might be watching who are aware of some of the challenges to developing that culture of feeling free to try things out because of larger pressures on schools. So those are the biggest challenges to it, but it doesn't mean we can't take it on.
I think we can take it on in little bitty ways every day too when we work with teachers by trying new things in front of people. I don't mean, like not being prepared, but I mean if somebody asks a question saying, I don't know, let's try it and see what happens. Oh, it didn't work. What else could we try? So it's just a small little thing, but I think that it makes a big difference. I know it does because I intentionally try to do this when I'm working with teachers, and a lot of times teachers will say, Amy, I can't believe that you ever have trouble with technology. And it gives me a chance to say, of course I do. I mean, I don't know how to use technology because I was born that way. I was born in 1971. There was no technology. I learned it by trial and error. And that's how all of us have to learn it. It's not natural. It's something that we learn. So day by day, we can take that on in small ways.
There's a school in the UK that did a one-to-one Chromebook rollout, and rather than just dumping the devices into the school and hoping something would change, they put a lot of time in preparation with the staff. But they asked the staff to kind of self-assess themselves for technology prowess, if you like, and essentially grouped them into 4 categories. So if you like early adopters, the people who figured they could run with it no matter what, down to the people who were really scared of it. But rather boldly, the group of teachers who said they were really scared about technology and didn't know how to use it, they pulled them aside and said, you're going to do the training.
Wow.
So initially, obviously, shock and horror. But then what they also said was, and we're going to give you time, support, and coaching in order to do that. But what that meant was when they did the launch and this group of teachers was delivering the sessions, it really meant for everyone else, without sounding too awful, everyone else was like, well, if they can get their head around it, I have no excuse. I've got to get on board with this. So a really interesting cultural approach to implementing technology where it wasn't just the usual people talking about it.
I love that. That's a great story.
A funny bit here, I come from a culture where people usually share only when bad things happen to them. And the way that Kev posed that question is kind of counts our guys out. Sorry. But I feel like technology and digital technology nowadays doesn't work with one human being. You need more. So the way the question is written, it has the answer in the question. So you can't develop technology or positive change, without involving more people into that. It's just impossible to do it in 2019, 2020.
Totally. So switching gears a little bit, one thing that we see as part of professional development more and more is data analysis and how to use data to improve instruction. Any thoughts on, there's a question from Lester, any thoughts on how big data and learning analytics might transform professional development and education more broadly in the coming years?
I work in I also have a contract with the Ministry of Education. There is a commission called Innovative Schools Commission. And the funny thing is, when it comes to the biggest data we can get into at national level is the data of all the students, all the teachers, and everything. I know that's a very small part of the mean big data, but I think that ministries and higher level organizations are a bit afraid to get a reality check, and they would be very cautious on comparing or adding extra layer of data into their activities because they have a political agenda there. A lot of money is involved in everything. On the other hand, to explain with simple words artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning, and also other terms, it needs very specific understanding and preparation. So if you want to have this at school level, so I would say that we need more time.
Any other thoughts on, do you see data becoming more and more a part of professional development, learning analytics? Is that something that is emerging or a bit more far off?
We've delivered a number of events where we have had an AI ML focused session for teachers. Just to caveat that, I'm a very strong believer in the power of design thinking in a lot of different scenarios. And design thinking very much focuses on, rather than lots and lots of data, getting deep with interviews and getting very empathetic with the user. On the flip side to that, however, Denmark's an interesting example. Denmark has recently updated its curriculum to include understanding computing. That's probably a really poor translation of the area of study, but it includes the study of artificial intelligence and machine learning. Not so that every Danish child can go and work for big data companies, but so that they understand what it is and what it isn't. And because they're going to be interacting with these technologies when they leave school, and well, now. So they've made a step towards upskilling their learners to interact with that type of technology. So the session that we've done starts by looking at things like Quick Draw. So Quick Draw is a great example of what AI and ML is, because you can show what 50 million drawings looks like, and then a machine can guess pretty well what you're drawing through Quick Draw. So that's a nice example. And the session has been really popular with teachers. We've had requests for it to be repeated in different places and for more. So I've found there's a real interest in understanding what AI and ML is and how that can apply to education. But when we get to the end of the session and we reference some of the case studies that Google for Education has done with Ivy Tech, the Carnegie Mellon Research, and also Strayer University's chatbot, there's definitely a pause for thought about, schools have access to a significant amount of data about their learners, but that next step to use it, like Alexander says, AI works well when the data is a very large amount of data and it's as unbiased as you can possibly get it. So I think there's some real challenges to doing it right and doing it effectively in a way that can give insights to teachers on their students in front of them, can give instant feedback to the students that's going to be really productive for their learning. So potential is really interesting, but I'm inclined to sort of fall on the side of Alexander that it's something that we continue to work towards, but let's be sensible about it.
Cool. I think we've got time for probably one more question. So to try and wrap things up a little bit, we know that it's so important to engage all types of teachers with professional development, and oftentimes folks are coming from pretty different places, especially in terms of comfort with technology and experimentation, trying new things out. So a question from Sean: how do you best recommend engaging staff that are potentially reluctant or hesitant to relinquish some classroom control to students and their questions and needs? And as an extension of that, are there any technology tools that can assist with this?
That's a great question, and it's something that I think it's safe to say we all do all the time in our daily work with teachers. So not everybody who comes to us wants to be there and is excited to be there and is excited to go back to their classroom and start turning over control to their students. And that's all very scary stuff to most teachers. So what we try to do is show teachers how to do a small release of control. And this is just a tiny example, but I think that it's something that a lot of teachers could use, collaborating with slides. So if we have teachers who are working in Google Classroom and they can assign, 3 slides to 3 students and have those students work together in a collaborative way, that's a tiny little release of control. And I think as teachers start to release control, for students to work together, to collaborate, they get more and more confident that students may rise to the occasion, that they may not have the chaos that they fear. But also on that note, asking teachers, what do you think will happen if you release control? What are your fears about this? And then kind of breaking that down to see, really would we have anarchy if we allowed students to work together in slides? Really, would that happen? And so we can kind of examine our own fears from outside and see, but those small little changes and then growing on those changes, increasing each time so that we can see students rise to the occasion.
As far as I get it, the aim is not to showcase different ways using technology to your students, but to make them use it and produce unique output. The way we do it when we deliver professional development or teacher trainings is to do a quick reality check with teachers and to show them, not in a bad way, to discuss on that. It's not a big deal if your students are better in using digital technology than you are, because you will be the person in charge after all, because you're in charge of the process, content, and you know where you're leading your class, and that's the most important thing in the classroom.
I saw a lot of success with digital student leaders, or however you want to phrase it. But when we implemented G Suite at my own school, and we've been fortunate to support some digital leaders, when you put a student with a teacher for training, the teacher is so much more willing to push past the difficult part, so much more willing to to not get frustrated. So we had a wonderful group of students, as most of them are, who when working with the digital leaders, it wasn't about the technology. It was about how they approach teachers, how they speak to teachers, how they build those relationships. So we had students trained up basically at the end of a lesson. If they'd seen a teacher miss an opportunity to use some of the technology we had available to them that could have made their life a bit easier, then the student would approach them and say, "Hi, miss, hi, sir. Hope you don't mind me approaching you, but just wondered if I could maybe show you how Google Classroom works, because like what you just did would be a lot easier. So when's convenient for you?" And the students would give up time after school, lunch breaks. And I know if I had said the same thing, I may have got a very different answer than when the students approached these teachers. And we got a lot of good feedback from the teachers about how wonderfully helpful and patient the students were. And therefore, it gave us access to some of the teachers that we might not normally have been able to interact with through like your traditional, there's a training session after school, or me approaching them as the one who's really happy with technology. So that was really impactful for getting those teachers you might not normally get through traditional training methods.
What a great idea.
Yeah, I love that. I think sometimes the students are the ones who are convincing the teachers. We've seen when we look at like the school as a unit where coaching is happening, there's always the teachers who say like, I'm just never going to do that. That's not my style. I'm retiring next year. I'm not interested. And when their students start telling them stories about what they were doing in science class or what they tried in their language arts class, it's slowly planting that seed. And so that we've seen after a couple months of teachers hearing stories of what's going on in other classrooms, then they're thinking, okay, maybe it is time to just take, like Amy said, a baby step and try something small and just see how it goes.
Yeah, one area where teachers are predictable is they tend to care about students. So any way you can link it to that, and they're all golden. And just for reference, I completely stole the digital leader inspiration from Jen Sheffer, who was doing it in, I want to say Connecticut, I think. So yeah, just not my initiative, just completely stolen.
Well, a great story and idea to wrap up on. So big thanks again to Chris for joining us to share the research, and to all of our wonderful panelists. So Alexander, Ben, Amy, and Angela, we really appreciate you joining and sharing your thoughts on this really important topic. So as we mentioned at the top of the hour, all of these sessions can be found on the website and watched on demand. So we've got 7 in total. G.co/future of the classroom. And that's also where you can find the full research report, both with the global lens, and then also some country reports as well. So thanks for joining us today, and thanks for all the awesome questions. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.
Tim. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Bye.